Welcome back to Fast Times. I'm Adam Nathan. This is Tom Wolf. And today we're talking to District 2 Supervisor Stephen Sherrill from San Francisco. Stephen was appointed by Mayor London Breed in December 2024 to fill a seat vacated by Catherine Stefani, who won election to the State Assembly. Stephen is focused on economic recovery and safe and clean streets, and he'll be up for re-election in 2026 to continue his term. And so today we're going to dive into what he has planned for public safety, for economic recovery, and for addiction and homeless policy in San Francisco that actually works. He's a personal friend of mine. I've known him for 10 or 15 years now, so I'm really excited to have him on the show. Let's get into it. Welcome, Stephen.
Adam, thank you. It is honestly really great to be here. And Tom, it's great to be here with you, not only because I consider you both friends, but also because I respect how much you've done to really change the narrative of what it means to support recovery in the city.
Well, it's an honor to have you, and crazy that you're here on the show as a supervisor. And we expect big things for you in your future career.
It's not that crazy, Adam. Come on, man.
Well, I always thought you would be here. And speaking of that, I've known you throughout your career. You've worked between government and the private sector before being appointed supervisor. What made you want to get involved in government in the first place?
In college, I majored in political science, and it was incredibly interesting then. And as I was going through my senior year, my hometown mayor, Mike Bloomberg, was running for re-election as soon as I was going to graduate. And I thought that'd be a cool place to start. Check it out. And I got a job on his campaign day after I graduated, hit the streets. I was working in South Brooklyn. And, I don't know if you know South Brooklyn well, but it's an incredibly diverse community. You have some old Irish neighborhoods, old Italian neighborhoods, Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods, Russian neighborhoods, Caribbean. And, going out there, talking to business owners, talking to residents, just meeting hundreds of people who, I had never met before and were different from what I grew up around was just really invigorating to me. And the idea that I was not only meeting and being exposed to new people and learning new things, but also had the opportunity to help them fix the broken curb or help them fix the stop sign. Those things were just fun and invigorating. And after that, I got a job in the mayor's office coming off the campaign as an assistant. And quite frankly, the challenges that local government faces every day and can deal with are some of the most important ones. Not only are some of them totally intractable, but I think they're also solvable. And so there's both the intellectual challenge, but there's also the emotional satisfaction and frustration at times of being able to listen to somebody today and help them in some ways tomorrow.
San Francisco is a small city, but I think it punches well above its weight, especially in the national news, international media. What do people get wrong about San Francisco?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I think San Francisco is, here we know it's incredibly diverse, but I think in the national media, it can often be posed as, coastal elites, as just one block or techie. And I think there's no question that there is a strain of elitism in San Francisco. Obviously, technology, that sector plays a huge role here. But what's cool about San Francisco is we are an intellectual, cultural capital of the world. Truly. But we're also made up of these beautiful little villages. And so if you look at our neighborhood merchant corridors, some of the local areas, whether, it's more, ethnic diversity, immigrants, diversity of thought, of experience, it is so cool going to all the different neighborhoods and seeing how different it is. Homogeneity is just not something that's actually real to San Francisco, despite what, the Fox News of the world might tell you from time to time.
Yeah, speaking of small neighborhoods, you represent a district that has a bunch of beautiful commercial districts, as you mentioned, amazing houses. You have about 2 years to win those constituents' trust before you're up for re-election again. What do you think you need to do to accomplish that?
Yeah, look, it's really 10 months. As the quirk of being an appointed supervisor is that I have an election in June of 2026 and then, actually again in November of 2026. So 2 back to back, kind of an odd thing. But, to me, it's about showing up. It's about showing up to every neighborhood meeting. It's about showing up to HOE meetings. It's knocking on doors. And quite frankly, that's about introducing myself to voters. But for me, the most important thing is I think as a district supervisor, and some people think we should have citywide and some people think we should have district. But regardless, I am a district supervisor. I am the voice of the District 2 residents to City Hall. And so if I don't know what they're saying, it's hard to prioritize. And I think the best example of my number one priority will always be safe and clean streets. Always. But one of the things we hear, the number one 311 complaint in our district is related to trees. It's broken sidewalks. It's trees encroaching on buildings. And if we're not, just yesterday I was walking down Green Street and there was the most ridiculously broken sidewalk. I mean, like truly horrifyingly ridiculous. And I went and knocked on the guy's door. This great guy, Aaron, he's like, oh my God, it's been 3 years. And we were able to get on with DPW, and it turned out maybe they'd misfiled something. And so, in the next few weeks, they're going to be out there to fix that. And that doesn't happen without being in the community and listening to people. And so my approach to the work is really grounded in constituent services. And that's both about being reactionary and hearing what people are saying. And it's also about being proactive. And I think where government, and especially the Democratic Party, unfortunately, has gotten away is not acknowledging people's day-to-day experiences, focusing mainly on statistics. I think at the national level, what we saw in the last presidential election was, look, we know you're suffering with grocery costs and inflation, but the economy is good. Don't worry about it. And I think we need to take a step back and say, if people are saying something, if people are saying, hey, there are, getting back to some of the work that you do, there is a lot of substance use happening on my block, but saying, yeah, that's okay. The tent numbers are coming down. The tent numbers might be coming down, and that's really good. But we also have to acknowledge that on certain blocks, people are getting hammered, by overloads of substance abuse and other disorder, and we have to acknowledge those actual lived experiences of residents, and really aggressively address those.
I think one of the things that I grappled with in my advocacy work the last 5 years was when pundits would come along and say, crime is down, look, crime is down, and then they would talk about violent crime, or they would talk about homicide. And then, what I would do is quietly point out to them, I said, these certain types of crime are down, but then there's these crimes that are actually reported separately from this bank of crimes that are actually way up.
Yeah.
And these are crimes related to felony drug dealing, drug possession, all crimes associated with substance use issues that we're experiencing on our street. And so when someone says, I don't feel safe, or there's a public safety crisis in San Francisco, for a lot of years, that's what they were really referring to.
Yeah, that's right.
But then you were gaslit by these folks that would come along and say, no, this stat says crime is down, everything's good. Yeah, super frustrating.
No, I mean, I think you bring up a great point. And we shouldn't ignore the fact that homicides in San Francisco are at an all-time low, which is amazing. That's awesome. But that means like, hey, we've got a good handle on that. How do we address the other problems? And I think a good example is substance use. I mean, the fentanyl crisis is the biggest public health crisis in this city, at least since the AIDS crisis, and we should treat it like that. But then also, I mean, I think you could draw that parallel with issues of domestic abuse and sexual violence and violence against elders. We have an office called the Mayor's Office of Victims and Witness Rights. They receive over 14,000 calls for service every year that lead to like 100 prosecutions. And so even though crime is down, there are still very vulnerable communities. And if we don't listen to those communities, and I think it's exactly what you talked about, I think it's some of the, domestic violence, sexual violence communities suffering from those, we need to be focused and targeted on those. And we need to, like you said, we can't gaslight these people. Yeah, sure, crime is down, and that's awesome. So the question is, what's next? How do we address the things that we're still struggling with?
What you're saying is so sensible, but it hasn't been said for a very long time amongst our elected officials in San Francisco. You are a fresh face on the scene, but a lot of your peers on the board have long histories in San Francisco. I would say they're a product of different machines that we've had in the city or have. What's it like to be the new kid on the block or to be the fresh face on the scene? What have been the pros and cons of your unique place on the board?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say I think I'm continuing a legacy of really practical thought in District 2. I think now Assemblymember Catherine Stephanie was in many times a lone voice on a lot of these issues. So I do think that it is. I think I'm continuing that legacy in the district, and hopefully I can continue to build on what she built and push it forward. As a new member of the board, I think it's interesting. There are a lot of new members of the board. And so many of us are coming in there, and I think some of us bring potentially more diverse experiences professionally than in the past. I'm not the only one who's run a startup before. There are three of us now that have done that, which I think is applicable to San Francisco. And I also think that for me, not coming from a political machine, and some others who maybe weren't part of that machine, we are a little bit more willing to look at sacred cows in a certain way. And there's certain sacred cows in San Francisco that are incredibly important. Our democratic values, protecting reproductive freedom, freedom of choice, protecting, marriage equality, love who you want to love, be who you want to be, like those things, like those things should be protected and exalted and put up on the pillow and the whole thing. But like how we are dealing with the drug crisis in our streets, it hasn't been working. Yeah. And I think we got to stand up and say that. And you too have. And some others have as well. But look, you've taken on the chin. People call you a fascist and a Nazi and all that stuff.
I get that a lot.
Quite frankly, that's just not true. You're out here saying hey, I could have died. Maybe I'm going to put words in your mouth. Maybe you should be dead. I don't know, but you're not. And you're saying, how do I save more people's lives? And that to me, it's aggressively compassionate. And I think that's where we got to lend this aggressive compassion approach. So as a new member, am I willing to look at things not only in the public safety realm, but I think, also in the economic development realm as well, and maybe making it a little easier for entrepreneurs to come in, for businesses to come in, rejuvenate some of the corridors that need a little juice. I think that's one of the biggest aspects of it. And just ask questions, but it has to be grounded in listening to people.
Can I ask a question based on that? So we both know that to address the drug crisis and the homelessness on the street, you need kind of a mix of compassion and accountability for folks. Some people need a nudge. Some people need a push. We certainly need to do a better job of holding organized drug dealing together. That's been a huge thing. And now under the current national political climate, it's become complicated because many of the drug dealers on our streets appear to be undocumented from Honduras. And, at the same time, San Francisco wants to resist Trump. I get that. But on the demand side, there's a new program that's opening up. It's actually new housing, drug-free housing that's opening up in your district over on Lombard Street. And I think that's a huge, first of all, a huge thank you to you for supporting recovery, because this is one of the first of its kind in San Francisco, where it's where it's housing for people that are coming out of drug treatment.
Yeah, the second
one, so they can live in an environment that's drug free.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about how your community, your district, kind of responded to that, and some of the challenges of getting something like that off the ground in your neighborhood?
Yeah, well, first, I thought you brought up a good point at the beginning. There are two parts of this, right? There's the demand side, and then there's the supply side. And law enforcement really does focus on the supply side. I think there's no question we need to, arrest and prosecute drug dealers. Looking at the demand side, and that's really about recovery. There are definitely elements where we need to support economic development, job training programs, helping young kids who are coming up through aging out of the public school system, aging out of the foster care system. How do we support them? But it's also about people who are in recovery. And I think for a long time, a lot of people don't know this, but federal and state dollars, you all know this, federal and state dollars related to housing cannot be used for sober-only housing. And not having a mix of options for people in recovery makes no sense to me. So Matt Haney is leading on this at the state level, and I think he's a star. Matt Dorsey has been a really loud voice here in San Francisco. He's awesome. And I think for us here locally, we have to acknowledge that we need a mix, and we can be a leader on this. There's some things in San Francisco maybe we should do less of. Really parcel by parcel zoning, maybe we should do a little bit less of. But when it comes to pushing the needle on saying we need a mix of options when it comes to recovery, that's really important. I think abstinence-based recovery programs, and I think the Salvation Army, which Adam obviously is the chair of the board here locally, they're a huge part of that because they're very smart. It's not just like, hey, we have this one program that fits all. They have 4 steps of the program. There's people coming in detox off the street. They have essentially shelters. I'm going to dumb that down a little bit, but then there's 6-month abstinence-based recovery programs, and then step 4 are these sober transitional housing programs. So one of those is opening up in my district. It has caused concern among residents saying, we don't want drug addicts here. We don't want criminals here. And what they are responding to actually has very little to do with that facility itself. What they're responding to are the SIP hotels, shelter-in-place hotels that opened up in Lombard on those Lombard motels during COVID, and many other communities have suffered from this. So, And basically it was like, hey, we're going to take a bunch of people who've never been in this neighborhood, who are exhibiting behavior that's not safe around families and children, especially families and children, and we're just going to put them in these hotels. And there can be no rules, and there's going to be no security, and there's going to be no enforcement whatsoever.
That's exactly what happened.
And so you basically had people there who feel like, this happened to me before, and you people did nothing. Why should I trust you now?
Right.
And I hear that so loud and clear. And it doesn't mean anything for me to be like, hey, dude, I'm new. Mayor Lurie is new. And I have to give a lot of credit to Mayor Lurie. I haven't mentioned him yet. But he, in terms of being a new guy, no sacred cows, really being aggressive, he and his team, you got Kunal Modi, Elisa John Baptiste, Paul Yep stepping up, this is a great team, Ned Siegel too. This facility is going to be fabulous. It's sober housing for people who are all employed. They're already doing neighborhood cleanups, and they're not even moved in yet. But to talk to residents, we have to be honest with them about saying, not only are we doing a better job here, but we're going to prove it by doing stuff ahead of time. And so what I've pushed for is saying we need more police presence in the neighborhood. And some people said, why? If you really believe this facility is not going to lead to increases in crime or drug use on the street, why do you need more police presence? And I said, because we had a 2-year-old last year who found fentanyl on the Moscone playground and OD'd. And thank God was saved. Thank God. I'm responding to that. And why we didn't respond to that earlier, I don't know. But that's why we need this. We have persistent break-in issues on Chestnut, and there's no police presence. So now we have a foot patrol officer who has started walking that corridor. We're going to have 2 community ambassadors, retired officers, walking that corridor. And I just think we have to listen to these residents who say, by the way, you haven't paved Octavia Street between Lombard and Greenwich in 21 years. And let me tell you something, that street it's a disaster. And it's maybe we should pave that. And so we're working on saying, hey, how do we get that higher in the queue? And so it's not just about doing the right thing. And I think this facility that's opening the Marina Inn is absolutely the right thing. The community should welcome this. But we also have to look the naysayers in the eye and say, I know what you're complaining about, and we're going to do it differently this time. We actually have to do it. We can't just virtue signal.
Yeah. San Francisco doesn't have the greatest reputation for some of their past programs.
Hell no.
But
for good reason.
New leadership, new direction, and recovery is now our official drug policy in the city. Recovery first.
It is now our official drug policy. Matt Dorsey pushed that through. Mayor Lurie happily signed it. He's got a fantastic public health director, Dan Tsai, who's really trying to drive accountability, and we're working with him to push them on being developing some of these accountability metrics a little more quickly. And it's hard work. But developing them and then making them available to the public. If people can't see what's happening with their eyes and can't understand what's going into it, how are they going to trust? We have to build trust.
I want to ask you a tough question. You talked about supply and demand before. I think talking about the supply side is easier. It still is unfortunately controversial to say that we should be arresting and prosecuting drug dealers, but I think most people would agree with that. But the demand side also needs to be addressed. And yes, providing more recovery housing for people who want to pursue that as an option is obviously the right answer. It's what I spent 5 years advocating for and building with the Salvation Army. But one of the things I learned from Tom and talking to hundreds of other people in recovery is that if you don't want to change, you're not going to change. Addicts are going to addict.
That's right.
And there are 2 key points in people's lives I've heard that inspire a potential shift in their journey. It's either waking up in a hospital bed or being in a cell with handcuffs on. And those hospitals and handcuffs are the 2 moments where you might get someone to say, hey, I've hit rock bottom. Maybe I should change. And Democrats are obviously very compassionate. You talked about aggressive compassion. What do you think we've done wrong on the demand side? I'm not talking about downstream in the funnel about not building enough beds, but right at the top. Are there things that we could be doing differently to get more people into treatment and recovery? And how do you think that Democrats can square, a more aggressive stance around compelling people potentially into treatment with our core values?
My experience and my point of view is very much shaped by people I've met and been around. And Tom, you you talked about it earlier when we were walking in here. We had coffee about 2 years ago, and you're like, I don't know who this guy is, but he works in the mayor's office. So I'll spend a little time with him, and I learned a lot. And I learned a lot sitting with Steve Adami and having him yell at me on the steps of City Hall. Like, yeah, right.
Sounds like Steve.
It sounds like Steve. And but the other thing, in my previous job, I was director of innovation for the city, and we were tasked with building out the first database that aggregated data from public health, fires, emergency response, homeless outreach, and DEM HSOC, the tent encampment
outreach
teams. And as part of that, we're building this database and we're building the front end user tools. But we weren't just working with data. We really wanted to get out and make sure we interviewed individuals suffering in the streets. Because I think if you don't have both sides of that, if you're not really trying to learn, it's hard to have the solutions. And I sat outside probably 30, 40 tents. I sat inside probably 20 tents. And that experience really shaped me because I have not had that lived experience myself. And what I found was that, I'll talk kind of brutally in many ways about a couple that I met living in a tent on Ocean Beach. And this was us sitting outside the tent. I said, hey, we can go inside. He said, oh, no, don't go inside. Zips open. Like, I was not going inside that tent. Couple, she'd given birth about 3 weeks earlier. He said, all we want is an apartment because we want to get our daughter back. And that to me is a very natural thing to want. Loving your child. I mean, I've got a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old at home. Like, that is so natural. And we said, okay, great. Like, what do you have to do to get there to get that apartment? And look, they have significant substance use issues, but let's just put that aside for now. And they identified a child protective services interview. They had about 10 days out as the next step to get to that apartment. So they'd identified what success looked like, and they'd identified the next step that they had to accomplish. And I was there with a DPH health worker. He said, great, what time should I pick you up? Can I get you an Uber? What bus line are you going to take? And this individual was unfortunately totally unwilling to engage in the conversation on transportation. How do I get there? And finally, this DPH worker said, if you're not going to be able to get there, what are you going to do? He said, oh, don't worry. It's really easy to reschedule those. I'm not worried about it. And that to me just said somebody has identified what success looks like. They've identified the next step, but they're totally unwilling to take that next step. And I think we need to be aggressively compassionate. I think picking that person up off the street and taking them to the Child Protective Services is helping that person get to their vision of success. And I think the concept of meeting people where they are, that does not bring them to where they want to be. And I think we need to be aggressively compassionate to bring people where they want to be. And so is that being in a hospital? Is that being in a jail? That to me is about, like, there are different policy choices for different people to make. But I think the first thing we need to say is that the days of us just stepping over people or walking past people have to be over. They are suffering, they need help, and we need to be aggressively compassionate to deal with that. And if they are breaking the law, they need to be told to not break the law, because not only are they suffering, but the 2-year-old who's just there playing on the playground is like, touching some fentanyl and ODing. And like, that is a horror show.
I'll say this, and I want your reaction to it. We have 4,000, 5,000 people sleeping on the street every night. 60% of them, 70% are suffering from substance use. The remaining suffering from mental illness. Some combination, obviously, are suffering from both. I don't see any way of getting thousands of people off the street quickly unless we arrest people and essentially compel them or give them a choice between pursuing treatment or being stuck in the court system. Tom knows a lot more about the specifics of what this policy could look like, but to your point on, there's a lot of folks on the street that know what success looks like. It's getting back to their families, it's getting back to economic independence, it's getting their own home. They know what the next step looks like, which is treatment, but they don't want to do it. They're not willing to make that change. Like, to me, that's the only policy solution that would significantly clean up our streets. And Democrats in the city, previous administrations, have been unwilling to go that far.
Yeah.
What's it going to take to get us to the point where we are finally enacting policy solutions that make a meaningful difference in a way that we can all see?
Look, I think this goes back to like a mix of solutions. Do I want to go out and arrest people? No, of course not. Like, nobody wants that. But at the end of the day, if you look at the, recovery housing as a mix of that, like, sober housing is a critical part of a mix. And we weren't doing that before 2 years. We literally weren't doing that before 2 years ago in this city. And now we are. And by the way, I think Salvation Army has 73% success rates, which is well more than double the average. And their programs are full. People get to the 4-step, it's 100% success rate. Those numbers are ridiculous. They're almost not believable. but like I see it as a fact. And so I think the question is, have we been doing things that are working? Yes or no? It's very simple. And the answer is clearly no. And so then the question is it right? Is it this, is that? Like, we have to be creative. We have to do new things. And if the answer is arresting people, taking them off the street and giving them a choice, I think that's a good choice. And let's not forget, there are recovery programs in the city's jails. There are. And so I think it's about basically saying, like, we want to continue to give you choices, but you don't have the choice to continue to use drugs near a playground. And so for me, one of the first steps that I'm taking is, again, it's in talking to the communities and talking to constituents. And we introduced a resolution to prioritize 911 calls of drug use near playgrounds and schools. And, we're working with the police department, we're working with 911 dispatch. But at the end of the day, what that means is, are we okay with people openly using drugs near playgrounds? Yes or no? If the answer is no, and I think the answer is no,
Most people would agree.
like, what are we going to do?
98% would agree with that, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
And so it's really, it's about the prioritization of the 911, but as a mother in my neighborhood said, but what are they going to do when they get there? And that is what this question is about. And I credit Paul Yep, Chief Yep. He has really leaned into this. And we're going to have a hearing on it in September, and I think he's part of the solution, but we do need to push the needle, because what we've been doing isn't working, and it's not working for individuals suffering from mental health issues, from substance use disorder, and it's not working for families who are not.
Before we move on, I got to ask you a related question about the mayor's RV plan that just passed, because that generated a little bit of controversy here locally. And I spoke out on it too, and others have. And the Coalition on Homelessness' view is that it's cruel, that we should let people basically stay where they're at until appropriate housing can be offered to them. And then I, looked at what the actual policy does, and it's pretty clear to me that the city bent over backwards to offer services to these individuals residing in RVs, including housing, transitional housing, shelter, RV buybacks, and safe parking sites. And yet the homeless activists that have basically been controlling the narrative up until a couple of years ago in San Francisco, pretty exclusively around our approach to homelessness, are vehemently opposed to that. Can you kind of explain to our listeners out there, what is your opinion? Like, why would they still be opposed if we're basically offering everybody a roof over their head?
I won't talk about what their motivations are, what their thinking are. That's for them to talk about. What I will say is, you put it very, very well. The city bent over backwards to make this incredibly compassionate, incredibly humane, and to really guarantee that the individuals who are being told, by the way, they can just drive somewhere else.
Right.
It's not like they have to stay in San Francisco. Right. We're not like just arresting them and taking their RV, but they can leave if they want. We're just saying there is a problem of RVs parking on the streets in San Francisco. And there's just no question about this. The complaints from neighborhoods are out the wazoo. I mean, it's just all over the place. This is not a new issue. This has been going on for 3 years. Myrna Melgar, supervisor in District 7, has been working hard on this. You got to give her a lot of credit. And Mayor Breed worked hard on this. It didn't work with her board. Mayor Lurie, this is one of the first things he looked to tackle as well. And we've got a new board, people working hard on this. It is incredibly thoughtful. RV buybacks for people. They're going to get cash in their pocket immediately. They're getting offered housing. Nobody is being put out on the street. That's just not happening. It is better for people to be living inside than it is to be living outside. Right. The city bent over backwards on this, and any suggestion that this is evil or wrong or people are being thrown out on the streets is just a lie.
Thank you for saying that, because he's correct.
Yeah, of course.
It's just a fact. It's just a fact.
I want to talk about economic recovery, because from what I understand of your priorities, safe and clean streets is number one, but economic recovery is number two.
Yeah.
We both lived here during the pandemic when it felt like a ton of people left the city, businesses shut down, homeless people moved into neighborhoods. And I think that was kind of the consequence of years of failed policy when it comes to supporting small businesses as well as large employers in the city. And all of those consequences were laid bare by the pandemic. You represent a district that has a ton of small businesses. It has some of the best, I think, commercial blocks in the city. Can you explain to somebody who doesn't understand how we got here, the cluster of dysfunction when it comes to the policies that make it really hard for a small business to thrive in San Francisco?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the reasons we got here is because people love the neighborhood merchant corridors. And I think a lot of the bad policies came out of love for San Francisco. So I actually don't think that they're coming from a necessarily bad place. I think, and oftentimes they're wrong, but they're not inherently bad. The joy of this city, like Market Street or Union Square, like great for tourism. Let's get them thriving. They generate so much tax revenue. It's unbelievable. We need those thriving. But the reality is, like, Fillmore Street, Chinatown, North Beach, West Portal, like Clement Street, like this is why San Francisco's cool and fun and people love to live here. But like, you're not on a Saturday being like, I'm going to go to the Market Street Farmers Market. You're like, I'm going to go to the Fort Mason Farmers Market. Like, that's the cool stuff.
Yeah.
So I think everything is built out of love for our neighborhood commercial corridors, and we don't want to be a strip mall on our neighborhood commercial corridors. We want local merchants. We want local food and beverage operators, coffee shops, bake shops, restaurants, bars, whatever. So I think this comes out of love for making sure that local creative entrepreneurs, and what's really cool is in our immigrant communities, I mean, those are some like the most, and because I think this is a city that loves immigrants, as we should, because damn, like immigrants have made this city, literally built this city, make it fun on an everyday basis. So like, I think that's where this came from. Is how do we prioritize small businesses here? How do we prioritize local creative entrepreneurs here? But I think the problem is that we kept building on protection after protection after protection after protection, and that may have worked when tech money fell like manna from the sky, but that's not a good long-term strategy. And what we've seen now is that there's so many barriers to entry for new businesses. It is so hard that not only are we struggling with foot traffic in a lot of areas, we're also struggling to fill empty spaces. A lot of the work I've done is about filling empty spaces, helping new businesses open. First year free, waives permitting fees for new business opening storefronts. We eliminated, frankly, a totally ridiculous permitting process for Formula Retail on Van Ness. Van Ness, 53% retail vacancies on the first floor, right? Like you walk up, I literally did a merchant walk on Van Ness. We would walk blocks at a time just past empty storefronts. There was a permitting process, conditional use permitting process. If you're a chain store, Formula Retail, you had to go through an average of 7.5 month permitting just for the right to open. And at the end of the day, we're kind of like, man, like you want to be there, like God be with you, please help us. Yeah. And we've already seen Apple Cinemas open up at 1,000 Van Ness, fill a long empty spot, which is awesome. It's awesome. We've got 4 more stores. And so a lot of it has been focused on making it easier to fill empty storefronts. And someone recently said, yeah, I get that. But how are you helping existing small businesses? Which is a fair complaint. Now, one of the things is the best way to help an existing small business is make sure the businesses around them are thriving and the storefronts are filled. Filled storefronts, filled areas bring more people. But it's also about activations on the streetscapes. Union Street is one that is great, but it is suffering from a little bit of a lack of foot traffic. And so they have the Union Street Festival, which is awesome. It happens towards the end of May. But earlier in May, Bus Stop, great neighborhood bar, celebrated their 125th anniversary. They blocked off one block. Great block party. It was awesome. And so I think it's being creative around how do we make it easier for entrepreneurs to be able to do these things. And I think there's a lot of controversy over closing streets permanently. Mm-hmm. And I think we gotta put that aside for right now. But when it comes to shutting down one block for a party, I talked to entrepreneurs about this, and it's expensive. A lot of rewriting MTA is expensive. But they even said, like, the San Franciscans are so great. They're like, you just give me a linear checklist, and I will do that. Like, I can figure that out. But right now, they don't have that. And asking people to ping pong back and forth from departments is crazy. We just introduced legislation with the mayor where this is just an example of something that's stupid. If you're building a building on a slope, you have to do a slope analysis. Okay, that makes some sense. So San Francisco requires you to do this slope analysis. It costs about $24,000. It takes about 4 months.
Holy cow.
That's a lot, right? But It's not crazy. We want to be safe.
Right.
Well, guess what? California building code requires you to do the exact same thing. And you can't just do one and apply for both. You have to do both separately.
Oh, man.
So like, why? Right. And the answer was eliminated. I think, the tables on sidewalks are a great example. You have to adhere to ADA regulations. Very important, very important. But you also have to get a permit for the right to adhere to ADA regulations. So we got rid of that permit too. And you still have to adhere to ADA regulations. We still send out an inspector from time to time to make sure you're making the sidewalk clear enough for folks. And so that's just an example of like, let's be honest. Do these things actually keep people safe? Do they make the city better, or do they just make it harder for creative people to do cool stuff?
I live in D8, which includes the Castro. The Castro has a ton of empty storefronts, and it seems like a ban against the same ban against chain stores that Van Ness had. What's the issue with spreading your legislation around chain stores in these kind of high vacancy areas to other parts of the city?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you talk to a lot of neighborhood merchants, and they're worried that chain stores who are able to not necessarily offer higher rent payments, but often longer leases. They're more willing to take on longer leases than a local creative entrepreneur. And that competition is very difficult for someone just getting started. So I think we need to be realistic about the fact that in most neighborhood commercial corridors, they want some chain stores. Lululemon on Fillmore is a great example. Everybody knows Lululemon, so people are going to come, and then they'll shop at, the place next door, or they'll go to Compton Coffee down the street. Like they'll come for that. But like if we had, Lulu next to Soul Cycle, next to, whatever, it becomes a little bit of branded monolith. And I think the concern is that we just allow everything to become blah, and that ends up eating itself. It's kind of the curse of diversification, to use. It's like a curse of success. It's like a Jane Jacobs thing. Like when too many banks move in on a block because it's the best block for banks, all of a sudden it becomes terrible because it's only banks and nobody wants to go there. So I think we need to be really careful about this. I think banks are actually a great example. You don't want too many banks all in one area because it makes that commercial strip pretty boring pretty quickly. So we got to be careful, but at the same time, we need to recognize that just putting a lot of regulations on without thought, without reason, maybe isn't the right answer.
What you said before is the first time I've ever heard an elected official talk about this, which is that a lot of bad policy outcomes start with good intentions.
Yeah.
And Jane Jacobs is a great example of somebody who has a lot of great intentions, who had a lot of great intentions, but is now being faulted for a lot of the economic immobility that we see in cities because of her push for preservation in the West Village. And that started with a good thing, which is, hey, we don't want all of this Wall Street money to come in and push out these immigrants and entrepreneurs. But that led to this calcification of the housing supply that now makes the West Village in New York the most expensive neighborhood, yada, yada. Here in San Francisco, housing first and harm reduction, two of the most destructive policies in our city, started as good ideas. And so when we talk about new policy, it's so easy to think of a good reason to create a policy. But as you said, Democrats in particular love, to just kind of layer on these policies to the point where like nothing's able to happen. No one's able to get anything done. I think deregulation is a term that's really associated with like Reagan and Republicans. It's red coded in a lot of ways. But what I hear in the strands of what you're talking about through your examples is how do we remove existing regulations? But I guess more philosophically, like, do you think that the government should just get out of the way generally? And how does that fit within like the democratic construct and how we approach our relationship between government and the people it governs?
So let me answer this in two ways. First, I think sunset dates are a great idea because it forces people to reconsider the regulation or the law in the moment. And that I think forcing us to think about, does this still make sense? You just can't go along with the flow. You got to think about, does this make sense? So one, I think sunset provisions on a lot of stuff make a lot of sense. And my example of this, Myrna Melgar put forward regulation, which I very happily co-sponsored, to make it easier to take these really large resale spaces and subdivide them. Mm. And what she said was the large 30, 40,000 foot retail spaces, 10,000 foot retail spaces that made a lot of sense 10 years ago in today's economic climate no longer make sense. We need to give landlords the ability to subdivide them more easily. Mm-hmm. And she said that it no longer makes sense. And Myrna Melgar is nobody's idea of a Reaganite. Yep. And it was just such a, and I mean this to credit her.
Of course.
She was so thoughtful and so pragmatic when she said, we have to address the situation it is today. I think that was the most important thing. The second thing I want to say is I don't believe government should just get out of the way. I think government needs to be an aggressive defender of rights, but also really needs to aggressively build the infrastructure for private society to thrive. You see a lot of people on Wall Street saying free markets, free markets, free markets. Wall Street is one of the biggest, beneficiaries of corporate socialism that there is. So like that's kind of a fake argument in a lot of ways. Government needs to be really thoughtful about where to invest resources and regulation and time. And when it decides that's where to go, we got to be aggressive about that. I think cleaning up our streets, we need to be aggressively compassionate about that. But it's about creating the infrastructure for private society to thrive. Government, does not build, great theatrical performances. Government does not build, Pride here in San Francisco. Pride is not run by the government. It's run by a nonprofit that is amazing. I mean, that parade, it is so fun, but government provides the police, provides the street, it provides the safety around that, and that's awesome. But it's the entrepreneurs who make it fabulous. And so I think government does not need to get out of the way. Sometimes maybe, but it's really about how do we create lanes for creative people to safely be creative and be successful.
Democrats have really struggled to find their footing and a message nationally in the second Trump era. He's scrambled a calculus on what it means to be a Republican, I think, in the first place, and he's moved really fast and I think more effectively than we expected on a lot of his priorities. How does your experience here in San Francisco with what's worked as you've implemented your agenda, what's not potentially, how's that informed your thoughts on what it should mean to be a Democrat nationally in 2025 and heading into 26?
I want to be a model for how government can protect our most sacred democratic values. For me, that is reproductive health, freedom of choice, marriage equality, freedom to love who you want to love, and at the same time, aggressively deal with the quality of life issues. We need to build trust. And the way to do that is by solving people's everyday issues, the little things, the quality of life issues. If we can win on those, if we in San Francisco can prove that not only are we a pillar of strong liberal democratic values, but we also will gain your trust by dealing with the everyday things, I think that's how we win.
Where do you think we're failing the most right now?
In San Francisco or as Democrats or both?
San Francisco.
I think there's no question in San Francisco, it's on the fentanyl crisis. It's on not being aggressively compassionate to get people into recovery, whether that's substance use disorder or mental health challenges. And quite frankly, people want to talk about housing first and permanent supportive housing and all that. But the reality is people compare us to Houston and say, why are we there's been a recent narrative. Why are we stepping back from permanent supportive housing when Houston did that and they're being successful? Look at that. Well, the reality is, the last 5 years, we put 10,000 people into permanent supportive housing. Houston put 12,000 people into permanent supportive housing. That's pretty close in numbers. Their numbers have gone down 63%. Our numbers have gone up. And you say, okay, well, what happened differently? They say, well, they coordinate with data, well, this, that. Houston's built 73,000 units of housing over that. It's relatively low cost. They have, easier zoning, cheaper construction, all that stuff. And so I don't think we can pursue policies without looking at the larger arena. And the reality is over the last 40 years, we've had incredibly restrictive housing policies that have led to two massive demographic gaps: young people, 25 to 35-year-olds, and middle income. And societies that don't have young people and don't have middle income people will collapse upon themselves.
Can I ask a related national political question? There seems to be a rise in kind of political extremism. Okay, you've got MAGA on the right. Now you have the Democratic Socialists kind of making noise. Mamdani in New York City. I wanted to ask you about him because he's going to get elected mayor, I'm pretty sure. I mean, the candidates that are around him are pretty lame, to be quite frank. So I can't imagine a scenario where Curtis Silwa or Mayor Adams actually gets reelected, even if they all join forces against this dude. But more importantly, why is it that it seems like so many younger people, maybe it's the millennials or Gen Z? Well, Gen Z is kind of divided, actually. There's a lot of new conservative Gen Z folks. Young men seems to be trending more conservative, at least from the polling I've seen. But why so many kind of in that 25 to 40 age group seem to be tilting to maybe give the hard left a try or democratic socialism a try? Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about, I think Gen Z is a good example, right? You talked about Gen Z is kind of shifting. You have a lot of Gen Z young men, much more conservative in the past. You have a lot of actually, a majority of Gen Z is leaning liberal, but you do have some young men, especially young white men, leaning more conservative. But at the end of the day, I think both of those groups are complaining about the same issue. They might have different solutions, but they're complaining about the exact same issue. And so if you look at younger Trump supporters, in many ways, their second choice is Bernie Sanders. And that's because everybody is saying stuff is too expensive. It's getting harder and harder to get a job. I look 10 years out of the future and the jobs that I want are all going to be AI, and you're not talking to me. And all I see being prioritized is money and wealth thrown around, and social media is telling me that Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez are spending $100 million on their wedding, and I got nothing. I met somebody rather, who is a member of the Republican Party here in San Francisco. He's 31, 32, 33. And he crystallized it to me. He said, my parents live in a house that cost them $250,000. And it's not that nice. And right now it's worth $1.5 million. He goes, I manage 8 apartment buildings in San Francisco. I will never be able to make enough money to buy that. How am I supposed to raise a family here in the city I grew up in and that I love? And that to me crystallizes it. It's about saying, like, again, it gets back to what is your everyday experience? Your everyday experience is that someone defecated on your storefront. Your everyday experience is that you have no idea how you'll find a 3-bedroom apartment to raise a family. And whether people are deciding on solutions on the left or solutions on the right, the issues in many ways are exactly the same. And unless we aggressively attack those, we are going to fail. And I think what's interesting is you saw Saikat Chakrabarty. He spoke last night about a variety of things. But on the Democratic side, maybe the more moderate Democratic side is all about this new abundance agenda that Ezra Klein talks about. He talked about abundance in housing. And then a lot of the more progressive folks have focused on the issue of Gaza. He also talked about Gaza. And that to me was a very interesting mix, where he basically took issues that are on one side of the Democratic Party and on the other side of the Democratic Party and put those two as pillars of his personal agenda. And that really spoke to a very young crowd that was there. And so I think it's all about saying, like, is affordability a problem? Yes or no? Let's attack that. Is the price of groceries a problem? Yes or no? Let's attack that. Let's not look at GDP. GDP is not a good measure anymore. I mean, yeah, we got to use it as a measure, sure. But like maybe the price of groceries is a better measure.
Yeah, we've talked a lot in this conversation about like technocratic ideas, which excite me, and you're very knowledgeable about. But I think there's a strain of anti-elitism that people are pushing back on, whether it's by supporting Trump, and they love the fact that he just like owns the system, and they like the idea of appointing these very unqualified people to top roles is the point. It's not a mistake. It's what he's trying to do intentionally, and I think his supporters love it. I think there's been similar pushback, Tom and I have talked about, to the abundance bros, because it's just this like another like costume for the elites to tell people like what they should do. And like this whole technocratic thing hasn't exactly worked very well, going back to the Obama years to now. What are we to make of that? And like, how does a Democratic leader break through and like connect with regular people on these everyday issues you're talking about in a way that doesn't feel elite coded?
I don't agree with you that the technocratic approach hasn't worked going back to the Obama years, very specifically because Obamacare was very much about looking people in the eye and saying, oh, you need more healthcare? I'm going to give you more healthcare. And I think the best example of that is what happened when Donald Trump tried to repeal Obamacare. Rural, red districts went nuts. And they're like, whoa. And now the conversation has shifted. And I think, if Trump really wants to cut back Medicaid this much, like, careful. I think it's not about the approach. It's about what is the problem and how we're going to be specific with that solution and deal with it. I think one of the issues with the abundance movement is a lot of the solutions are not about building more housing, but about saying, hey, if we just get rid of all the regulations, the housing will come. Don't worry about it. Obama's approach, like, it implemented a thing that led to more people getting healthcare. And so I think the question is not about, is it technocratic or not? Is it a solution that will show immediate gains? I think one of the challenges here in San Francisco around housing, conversations right now about zoning. And I think one of the challenges about zoning is it is necessary, let's say, I'll just take a step back from it. As somebody who believes we need more housing in San Francisco, very strongly, especially middle income workforce housing, very strongly. The conversation right now is about zoning. Expanding zoning to allow taller, bigger buildings and more housing in San Francisco is probably necessary from a policy point of view. It is definitely necessary from a legal point of view. It's not in and of itself going to lead to more construction. And so you're going to have people who are going to say, you did all this zoning, but rent is still going up. And I didn't see a new building get built. And so for us here in the city, we can do all the zoning we want. It's not going to lower interest rates. It's not going to lower tariffs. It's not going to lower materials costs. It's not going to lower labor costs. So we got to be more creative in saying, hey, there are like 5 stools of construction costs. How do we lower construction costs? That's actually how you get stuff built. Or you increase rents, which makes stuff less affordable. Right now, here's a great trope. Here's a great kind of conundrum. Developers tell me in order for housing to get more affordable, aka to build more housing, rents need to get less affordable. In order to justify developers building a building right now, their return has to be higher. It's this like, that's not going to work. And I think the question on the government side is, yeah, we can rezone, but how are we going to help lower construction costs? And that is really the policy area where we have failed over the last 4 years here in San Francisco and in California at large, but especially here in San Francisco. And we ignore that at our peril. And I will say that although all the air in the room is being talking about zoning, there is a lot of conversation about how we can lower construction costs here in San Francisco, focused around the permitting process, focused around how some fees are being done and what can we do to make it a little bit easier for developers to build.
I guess on the elitism point, though, I agree with you on the substance. What I was talking about, though, is also style, and like vibes are so important these days. The feeling people get from seeing something. You mentioned Lauren and Jeff Bezos on social media. Donald Trump's like Democrats for a long time have complained about the Republican Party because we've always said, like, don't people know what they're voting for? Like, they're voting against their interests. But it felt, I think, to a lot of those voters that one party listened to them and reflected their values and another party didn't. And even though I'm curious what your thoughts are on the style of Democratic leaders who get elected, what we can do to improve our connection to regular people there, because I think our policies technically are better.
I agree
but it seems
with
like
you,
something's not connecting in the same way.
I think Donald Trump is a dishonest person, but he's very honest in his dishonesty. And, he looks at you and he's like, hell yeah, I'm a billionaire. Of course I bought a gold toilet, wouldn't you? And people are like, maybe. Yeah. And he doesn't make excuses for that. And he makes excuses for a lot of horrific behavior like sexual assault and some other things. I really dislike him as a person and also as a president, but he's not pretending to be someone he's not. And that is very clear. And I think that a lot of people respect that. And so I think we can be honest and, some of it might just be like, let's have a little more fun, quite frankly. But like, look, there was certain governor who was in Vogue recently talking about how cool it was and how common it was that he was the first guy to be in Vogue wearing Gap. First of all, he wasn't. Like, that's just not true. And second of all, nobody gives a shit.
Do we want to talk about who that governor was, or no, we won't.
You could Google it.
No. Well, yeah, I'm curious about this because I think you've been super effective so far in your tenure, not just on delivering results for the constituents in D2, but also in how you've connected with the people that you serve, how you reflect back their needs, their problems to the people you work with, but also to the general public. So I think you're doing something right when it comes to how you communicate and how you connect. That's substantially better than what I see other elected officials doing. So I'm curious how you've approached that part of your job, because I think it's what makes you so compelling.
I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. I'll go back to some of the interviews that I did when I was the director of innovation. First couple interviews, I would say, hey, I'm from the city. We'd like to help you. Blah, blah. And people are like, nah, buzz off. And finally, I went to interview a guy and I was tired and it was like kind of rainy. And I was just like, dude, can you help me out? I'm not going to get you anything. I have nothing for you. Your answers might help me fix the system. I have no idea. But like, can you just help me out? He's like, yeah, sure, sit down. I was like, oh, okay. Every interview I pass after, I go, hey, I work in the mayor's office. I'm trying to fix the system. I have nothing to offer you. Can you answer a few questions? I would literally say, I have nothing to offer you. I cannot help you. I will not help you. Can I ask you a few questions? Every single person was like, yeah, sure, no problem.
Yeah, because people have a lot to say about the city. Look, people like me, like I've been speaking out for 5 years. Yes, I want to raise awareness around the drug crisis, but I'm a native San Franciscan. I grew up in this town. I got married in this town. My kids were born in the city. I got married in the city. I love San Francisco. And even though like I have some bad juju in San Francisco because of what happened to me, This city should be, it used to be what they call it, the Paris of the West, right? Is what they used to call it. And then it lost some of its luster. It really did. And I really appreciate pragmatic leadership coming back into City Hall with Mayor Lurie, with people like yourself, Danny Sauter. I really like Raphael Mandelman, and I have become like really friendly over the last few years because of his approach.
Yeah, great leader.
And it's encouraging to me to kind of see this turnaround. And yeah, there's a lot of work to do. And no, you're not going to solve everything. And no, you're not going to get rid of all the drug dealers, but we can make it better for everybody.
I mean, Tom, I think what you just said, we can make it better. Like, I would love to solve all the world's problem in the next hour. Like, that's just not going to happen. And like, I think that's always the balance of being a politician, where I'm like, I'm going to make your life better. And then people are like, yeah, well, maybe not. But I think, one, it's incumbent on us to try, and we have to do things differently because it hasn't been working. And I also think that like better is good. President Obama said this recently. A few months ago, he was here in San Francisco, and someone was complaining about, I think it was something about homelessness. And he was like, whoa, he was like, remember, better is good. Like, you can't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think we need to make incremental progress, because like, you get 1% better every day. I mean, which by the way, we're not, and that's impossible. But if you get 1% better every day, which seems like nothing, you're going to be twice as good in like, what is it, 48 days or something? I don't know. You can do that math. I'm not going to do that. You're the tech guy.
Well, I think it starts with caring, because even if you don't make things better, I think having someone in elected office who cares, who listens and tries, is still rare amongst the people that we vote in to represent ourselves. And I think that's what, your example of actually noticing that the street was messed up and going to knock on that resident's door and probably making the phone call yourself to DPW to see where in the system it got lost. Like, that's the kind of rare behavior that I think people want in the people that represent them. And I think just like listening and being a representative for your constituents is the job. And that's what you said right at the top of our conversation. And I think the people of District 2 are better for it.
Well, thanks for saying that. But I think the most important thing for everybody, San Francisco, wherever, to learn is like, none of this happens if people like you don't stand up and shout. And like, I think you could put like Adam Mesnick on that list. Like, there are a bunch of people, right? Like, this doesn't happen without you. So, and I think that's when people say like, what can I do to help? I'm like, just keep saying it. Like, just keep putting in that 311 request. Like, those little things actually matter. People can move the needle. And one of the reasons we got to this place that you talk about, how did we get to a place where it was okay just to set up your, drug dealing cart outside of Balboa on Fillmore at 1 a.m. Like, we got to this place because people were a little afraid of standing up. Yeah. And I think it's people like you who are pushing that needle, and none of this works without you.
Well, thank you. Well, I guess on that note, Supervisor Sherrill, it was a pleasure having you on our show. I'm glad you're the supervisor out in D2. We need every ally we can get to help turn this city around. And I don't just speak for me, I speak for Adam, for all of us that love San Francisco. And I just really hope for the best and would like to see you continue on and helping make the city a better place, man. So thank you.
That means a lot coming from you, Tom. Thank you. Man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, Stephen, it's been amazing to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat. For those of you who live in District 2, we'd love to hear from you directly. We'd love to hear how you've experienced the benefits of having a great new supervisor on your team, what you'd want for the future of your district, as well as for San Francisco. So hit us up in the comments, on Twitter, wherever we are. And thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.